So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Scott Miller. He's going to talk for a few minutes. Scott, if you'll come up, please.
Thank you very much.
We're good.
Basically, I was Luke's sidekick for 7 months, and that's how I got to be asked to say a few words. But before I start, I first want to thank the City of Delaware for allowing us to come up here and talk to all of you. And I also want to, with the City of Delaware, the sister city committee. Where are they? I know over here, right here in the corner. So thank you. We appreciate this. The City of Delaware is a sister city with several cities throughout the world, and with Luke and I having done our travels, we really appreciate that. And I also want to thank Rick Strange, with principal at Delaware Hayes, for allowing Luke and I to come into the city schools. Luke actually spent the whole day there talking to a lot of classes, and I also want to say that the Delaware Hayes, which is where I graduated from, and I recognize a few fellow Hayes graduates here, that it was actually Delaware Hayes where I had my first cultural exchange. It was small, but it was a cultural exchange. If you can, do any of you remember, she's still in town, Mrs. Jordan, guidance counselor? Brian, you remember her? Yeah, okay. She's retired, of course, but back, to age me, back in the 70s, the Vietnam War was going on. And it just so happened that when we had that unfortunate exodus of the South Vietnamese, there was a family that located here. And I remember getting called down into the office, and of course, as a kid, you never wanted to be called down in the office. And all of a sudden, she called a group of us down, and she said, "We have this Vietnamese family that's moving into town, and tomorrow is the first day of this young boy that's going to be in school with you, and we want you to greet him and basically befriend him." And that was, of course, a long time ago, and I don't remember much about it, and I'm sure I did not do a very good job. But I remember he was so smart. His math skills were unbelievable, and if I could have sat next to him in class, I would have gotten A's instead of C's. Anyway, but as I mentioned, I was Luke's sidekick for 7 months, and if we could get a slide up there. I'm going to first show you the route that I shared with Luke. And I say I was his sidekick, but actually I was probably his partner in the rear, if you can imagine that. I know sometimes I would ride alongside him. A few times I'd ride right within inches of his tire, but that was probably because there was a headwind. And when you are bicycling, if there's a headwind, if you can get behind somebody, and Luke was I got behind him. And then, of course, some of those places, as you can imagine, they were full of mountains. And all I can tell you is Luke was very patient, waiting for me to reach the top. And I appreciate that. But basically, when I was with Luke, we got to tour 7 countries. And as you can see, we flew into Kathmandu, Nepal. We then spent some time in Nepal, worked our way down to Bihar. And then we took a bus up to the Sikkim area, and then we bicycled throughout northeastern India for about 8 weeks. And then we tried to get to Myanmar, but India and Myanmar, they don't necessarily get along with each other, and we couldn't get a border crossing. So we flew into Thailand, Bangkok, which was just an awesome city, everything that the song tells you about. And then from Bangkok, we rode into Myanmar, from Myanmar back into Thailand, Cambodia, up to Laos. Then we went over the mountains of Laos into Vietnam, worked our way up to Hanoi. And then, one of those bittersweet moments, I said goodbye to Luke as he continued his route up into North Vietnam, into China, and I eventually worked my way home. But Luke said I could tell one story. And that's what I'm going to do. And what I thought I would do is share with you a number of photos. I know that Luke, go ahead and run the photos. I know that Luke is going to be sharing a few stories about the many people he met, and also the the many sights that he saw. But in our travels, the area, especially parts of India and Myanmar, all of Thailand, and a good part of Cambodia, was just this huge presence of Buddhism. And it was just spectacular. I mean, here, growing up in Ohio, and thank you, and growing up in Ohio, and we're used to, anything that's 200 years old, we think it's old, and they're over there, 1,000 years old, 1,500 years old. There was even one place we were at where it was, we were in the BCs. It was just, phenomenal. But anyway, what I want to do is kind of show you some stories that are of the Buddhist site, since he wasn't going to be talking about Buddhism, and I decided I would tell you this one story about this temple. And to give you a little background, we were in the northeastern part of India, and we were climbing in this mountainous region, and I would compare it close to the Smoky Mountains. And we've been climbing all day, and unfortunately, since that morning, I was feeling quite ill. And as the day went on, I just became more sick. Of course, I'm not sure that was because I was in the mountains or because I was just sick, but I felt really sick. And finally we came to the top of this mountain, and we were in this village, and it was nightfall. And I told Luke, we're not going to camp tonight. We're going to stay in a guest house. And so the first guest house we found, we booked it. And so it's the following day now, and we decide, let's take a day off. My body needed it. And so it got to be early afternoon, and of course you can imagine a 24-year-old, he was stir crazy at that point. And of course I was finally beginning to feel better, and so I said, well, let's get on our bikes and ride a little bit. I won't have any gear, and let's see how we do. So we did that, and as I said, this village was just the beginning of the summit. And we kind of bicycled through the village, and finally we came to this very small dirt and gravel road. And we decided to take a detour and take that, and it took us right to the summit. And what you find out real quick if you're traveling where there's Buddhism is there's a temple almost on the top of every mountain. And so we rode this small road up, and it dead ended right at this temple. And just as we got to it, we started hearing this music and this chanting. And I can tell you that Luke and I had been to a lot of temples, but we never had heard this much music and this much chanting. So we got off our bikes, put the bikes next to the tree. We walked in, and it was a real sunny day. And I remember walking in, and it was a darkened temple. But all of a sudden, as I could start seeing everything, there was like 4 rows of these monks. And I would say there's 40 to 50 monks. And they were all sitting in these rows, and they were all cross-legged, sitting at these lap tables. And at each one, at each spot, they had a teacup. They had this huge stack of cards and that had their chants on it. And they had a musical instrument. Some had cymbals, some bells, some horns. And when we walked in, we noticed there was 3 other Westerners already there. So we sat down right next to them, and we were there but maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and they got up and left. And of course I was feeling quite sick still, and all I wanted to do was lean against that wall and just take it easy. Well, I think one of the monks must have realized that we were settling in for the afternoon, and we weren't going anywhere. And all of a sudden, a monk from nowhere came over and dragged 2 floor mats over for us to sit on. So, we were sitting on hardwood floor before that. So we sat down on those floor mats. And then we noticed, as they continued their chanting, and now and then they all suddenly would stand up and they'd start ringing bells and clanging their cymbals. And somebody would get up, and there's this huge drum, and he'd start banging on the drum, and they'd be playing those musical instruments, and then they'd all suddenly stop, and then the leader would start chanting again, and then a minute later, everybody be chanting. And that was, just a wonderful experience. But then there were about 3, what I would say, young boys. They were probably 10, 11 years old. And they would then, just now and then, would get up from where they were sitting, and they'd grab these big pots of tea. And they'd walk down these aisles, and then they would fill up everybody's teacup. Well, they came down to our area, and all of a sudden they walked over and grabbed 2 cups and handed the 2 cups to us, and then filled us with the tea. And of course, being sick, I'll tell you, the tea just felt great because it was hot down my throat. And then they would do that, and so now we've been there for an hour and a half at least now. I mean, this was a long service, any service that I've been to in church, and then the biggest surprise came to me, and because I was there, I know now that's the end. But what happened was, all of a sudden they brought out this huge basket, and it was a basket of this homemade dark bread, and they took it to the front and they blessed it. And then they passed it around, and it came around, these young men, and they gave Luke and I, a piece of bread. I mean, a big chunk of bread. And then they brought out this basket of fruit. Now, the apples, I remember, were really small and weren't very good, but they came around and gave it to us too. And then, the best of all, they all at once, they brought out huge baskets of snacks. I mean, which really caught me by surprise. I mean, snacks like potato chips and cookies and crackers. And I asked Luke last night when I was I was using him as my fact checker to make sure I'm telling you correct. And I said, were there some Cheetos in there too? And he said, yeah, there were. I mean, I was just amazed. So I guess why I tell you that story is 2 things. First of all, Luke's heading is, it sort of works out. And that's what happened that day. It did just sort of work out for me. If it had been any other day and I wasn't sick, I've got Luke who's always, okay, Dad, let's go. And if it was any other day, we would have been there for 10 or 15 minutes, just like those other 3 Westerns, and we would have, said, oh, this is neat, and we'd been back on our bikes. But because I wasn't feeling very good, we just, sat back. I remember leaning against that back wall, and I guess those monks just realized we were just in for the day. And the result of that, instead of just, they did their thing and we just sat there and observed, they brought us into their fold. And before I knew it, they gave us not only floor mats to sit on, but they were giving me teacups with hot tea, and we walked out with a stash of great food. Especially Luke, he enjoyed all the chips and cookies. And I guess the other reason that I want to tell you that story is that it was not only the monks, but it was just constant how friendly and how generous the people were. If I had hours to talk, I could tell you stories after stories about how friendly and how generous the people were that we ran into. And maybe it was because we were just 2 Westerners on a bike. And I would say that initially they probably were coming to us because they were curious. Who's these 2 men riding bikes over here? But before I knew it, we were being invited in for homestays. Please come in and have a cup of tea with me. Please come in and meet my family. Or sometimes, and when I say it, it's true, come meet the village. I mean, we would end up meeting the entire village. And all I can tell you is, I think back upon, that my first cultural experience at Delaware Hayes with that Vietnamese student. And I failed at that. I didn't do a very good job of welcoming him, but that was probably only 9th or 10th grade at the time. But as I reflect upon that and I reflect on this trip, I guess my only point is that I really lucked out. I had a fabulous trip, but yet I think the most important thing, it opened my eyes that here we were traveling on the other side of the world, and these people were just unbelievably friendly and generous to us. And and one quick, real short story. This is not a script. I remember. You remember on October 31st, there was that incident, the Uzbekistan man who rented a truck and went through, killed a few people in New York City. And I remember Luke calling us a couple days later, and I said, Luke, do you remember, or did you hear about this? Of course, he didn't hear about that at all. He's in Uzbekistan. But he said, you know, the people here have been just like they were when you were with me, so friendly and so generous. And I think my point here is that I appreciate what our sister city committee's doing, what the city schools are doing, because this cultural exchange and us learning about other cultures has been so beneficial to me, and it's really opened my eyes of there's just a lot of kindness out there in this world. So with that, I've talked longer than I wanted. I want to introduce Luke. He actually leaves Thursday. He's continuing on his trip. He flies out Thursday. He'll spend a 23-hour layover somewhere in Arabia. I'm not sure which country, but he'll eventually be in Nepal, and he's hoping to travel some more. But here's Luke, and to talk about it sort of just works out.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'm not quite sure how long these Buddhist slides go. It's part of my dad's section, so we'll see. So I've been traveling for a year and a half now, and we got to get past these so we can understand that. 1 second. Okay, so here's the general map where I've been so far. So far I've been only through Asia so far. As my dad said, you know, we cycled through Nepal, India, Southeast Asia together. After he left, I headed into China. Unfortunately, partway through China, my visa expired, so I was forced to take a bus up to Mongolia. Cycled through Mongolia, back through China, then Central Asia. Finally, I made it to Azerbaijan, and from there, I flew home for the holidays. Now, when deciding what to talk about in this trip, and I thought, I wasn't quite sure how familiar most people are with bicycle touring. You know, it's not, I've actually been cycling, I've been cycling for a year and a half, and I've met dozens and dozens of Europeans, actually, on bicycle touring. But I've met a total of one American, and that was out in Nepal. So I figured I would start this little presentation by describing what exactly bicycle touring is. And to do that, I've broken it down into 4 simple steps. So after this, everyone can start bicycle touring. So first off, number 1, you cycle all day, right? There's me, having a great time cycling. After that, you stop and you cook. And you eat as much food as you can. There's one of the dinners I cooked. We carry a gasoline stove with us, so we're able to cook wherever. After that, you find a place to camp. Okay? There's me camping in front of a Tibetan monastery out in China. And then you repeat, right? So you wake up the next day, cycle all day, having a great time. You cook and eat a lot of food. This is a fish and tomato sandwich. Yeah. And then you find a place to camp. There's me camping. Hopefully you notice in the background some camels there. It's one of my favorite shots. That was out in Mongolia.